Hello and welcome back to the Avoid the Tyrewall podcast. Today I'm going to do a bit of a season review up until Imola. So Imola was actually the most recent Grand Prix when I'm filming this. So yeah, let's get started. Bahrain, Alpine, serious issue. Like I had no idea what was going on. They still seem to have like a few issues. They aren't as many issues as when we started the season, but there are still a lot of issues that really are not great. In F3, it's a very strong field, like because I watched the F2 and F3 also in Bahrain, and just F3 is absolutely insane. So is F2, and the field is insane. It's so strong. It's like full of so many talented, incredible drivers. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to the rest of the season. This weekend in Monaco, I can already tell it's going to be chaotic, but I'm so looking forward to it because honestly, I think F2 and F3 are probably better than Formula One, which, controversial. But this season, it's not been stunning as a whole, but just F2 and F3 is so much more interesting. Obviously, there's more drivers. So there's like more opportunities, more stuff goes wrong. I'll talk about the Imola Grand Prix weekend this week a little bit later on, but absolutely insane. At first, obviously, McLaren were very iffy. Now they're obviously not as iffy because Lando obviously got the win. But yeah, McLaren, they started off the season not very strong, but the Red Bulls, opposite end of the spectrum, they were so strong. They were so insane. They were like absolutely insane and they were so amazing. Well, there was a couple of incidents in the Bahrain race. So on lap one, Lance Stroll spun, which was not great. Um, but then, it did look like we had a couple of DNFs, but it turns out actually no one DNF'd, which is the first time in history that all 20 drivers have finished the first race of the season. I think, isn't it I think Australia is going to be the first race of the season next year or next season, which I'm really looking forward to because I think Australia, it just makes sense to be the first race of the season. It's out of the way. It's it's just absolutely banging. Like the F Australia race is amazing, and it's like this year it's chaotic. Last year it was chaotic. But let's talk about Saudi Arabia now. So, this week there was a lot of issues, I think, with Alpine, like internally. So there was like people moving about, people leaving the team. And then obviously we had the Red Bull scenario with Christian Horner, which I've talked about before and I don't really want to cover again. But the FIA president was being investigated as well. And Ollie Behrman replacing Sainz. Obviously, very glad Carlos Sainz is all right. Oliver Behrman is an incredibly strong driver. He's so talented, and I'm so glad he got to show that in the F1 car because Prema are struggling a bit in the F2 car at the minute. But like in F1, Ollie Behrman, absolute legend. Um, and I've actually got written here the F1 car is 9 seconds a lap quicker than the F2 car at Jeddah, and that's absolutely insane. Also, Fernando Alonso was P2 on the race or in the race on the day that Ollie Behrman was born, which is pretty funky. And it's still insane to me that, Fernando is driving or still competitively racing like 100 million years into his career. I know it's not 100 million, but I can't remember how many it is. But yeah, we had a couple of DNFs for Saudi Arabia. And then there seems to be a lot of unsafe releases this year from pit boxes. And I just, obviously people make mistakes at human nature, but there does seem to be a lot of more like dumb mistakes and like silly little mistakes, if that makes sense. I liked that Ferrari seemed to show a lot of support for Ollie Behrman. Like, the Ferrari team were constantly complimenting him and saying, you're doing really well, blah, blah, blah. And I think that shows like that they are like a good team. And I know they've had their issues with obviously Carlos Sainz, like sort of being kicked out of his seat. But I just think, it's it shows that they do have good values and they do treasure their drivers. Then Australia, the controversial one. Logan Sargent kicked out of his seat, Alex Albon in. I thought, and I made a couple of TikToks about this, I thought it was ridiculously unfair and unjust because, Logan Sargent, he's just trying, and I get that Formula One's competitive, like I know that, but he's like trying his best, he's not driven F1 before. or he did last season, whenever it was. But he just, it's unfair for them to just kick at him out in favour of Alex Albon. And it was like a proper, like, sour taste, if that makes sense. It left a real sour taste in quite a lot of content creators' mouths. Um, and then Max Verstappen DNF'd, which was absolutely nuts. And Carlos Sainz obviously won that race. Now, next race is actually Japan, but I haven't watched it. I was away when it was on, and the time difference was like ridiculous. So I'd have to get up at like 1 o'clock in the morning. Um, and as much as I love Formula One, I'm on holiday and I can't do that. But yeah, I think Max won. But overall, the season so far is looking all right-ish. Then we moved on to China, a sprint race weekend, which was a really peculiar choice, given that we'd literally not been to China, I think, since 2019. Yeah, that was a bit of a strange choice. And we had Lando Norris on sprint quali pole, and I really think this is when um the McLaren's pace started coming through, started being shown. But it was a bit of a wet weekend, and it seemed quite scrappy, and there was a lot of issues. Then Miami, uh, F1 Academy weekend, and I'm really enjoying F1 Academy. I think it's really interesting to see, all the different levels of drivers, because obviously quite a lot of the drivers have different backgrounds. Like, Amna Al-Khabaisi and Hamda Al-Khabaisi are obviously really, really strong drivers. And then Abby Pulling's really strong drivers. But then, like last year, Chloe Chung was a rookie in racing, like as in race cars. She done karting. But I just think it's so interesting to see how everyone develops as a driver. But yeah, Abby Pullen actually won both of the races in Miami, and then she went on to win the British F4, and I think that's absolutely incredible. And I really look up to Abby, and I think she's really inspirational. I absolutely was dying at this race. Like at the start, it was really interesting, and it was like really dramatic. And Kevin Magnussen, I'm sorry, what was Kevin Magnussen on? He is like trying to plague the rest of the drivers as much as he can. Does that mean he has a seat for next year? Does that mean he doesn't have a seat for next year and so he just doesn't care? I guess we'll have to wait and see. But he was an absolute menace in these races recently. Um, and then Sainz versus Piastri. I don't obviously I'm a Piastri fan, but the beef between those two, or the one-sided beef from Carlos, is so funny to me. And like he just constantly goes out of his way to just moan about Oscar. Like Oscar's just trying to exist. He's just trying to race. The last few laps, and I've said this on my little TikToks, the last few laps I was stressing. I was like, oh my God, is Norris gonna like have a mechanical failure, like crash, do anything else? The McLaren team, they were reflecting what I was feeling. They looked terrified, but Norris won and got driver of the day, which was absolutely incredible. Yeah, obviously Imola last year got cancelled due to the horrific rains. And I think it was a really nice touch on the trophy. It said it got like all the winners listed around a swirly thing. And on 2023, it said the Emilia Romagna citizen, which I thought was really sweet. F2 and F3 were absolute chaos during sprint races. Sort of during the feature race, it sort of mellowed a bit, but um, the sprint races were absolutely insane. And I think there was 5 cars DNF on the first lap of the F2. And to be honest, on the last few laps, I thought that Lando Norris would catch Max Verstappen, but he didn't. And it was good to see that McLaren can fight and they can battle and they can be close to winning. And it was just really interesting. Um, I'm really looking forward to Monaco because I think F2 and F3 will be, as I said earlier, absolutely insane. Also, Indy 500 week, and if you don't know, I've started getting into IndyCar a little bit more, but I cannot wait for the Indy 500. It'll be so good. Hulkenberg going to Sauber, not quite sure what that was about, but you know, each their own. The season's getting better now that McLaren are getting more competitive. Thank you for watching this week's episode of the Avoid the Tyrewall podcast, and see you next week. Bye!